I can still see the rows of empty chairs lined up in front of me, each one a reminder of who didn't bother to come. I had spent years dreaming of this moment, my book launch, the day I would finally share my story with the world. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a navy suit I had saved for special occasions. I did my makeup twice, steadying my hands, telling myself this was my day. Yet by the time the clock struck 2, I realized I was standing alone, surrounded by silence broken only by the clinking of wine glasses from strangers who had wandered in for the free refreshments. I looked at the small stack of my novels displayed on the table. Their glossy covers caught the light, hopeful, untouched. Each page represented mornings I woke before dawn, nights I pushed past exhaustion, weekends I sacrificed. And yet the people who mattered most, my own children, had chosen something as trivial as a spa outing over supporting me. They hadn't even sent a message to wish me luck. To them, it was just another Saturday. But for me, it was the culmination of decades of holding a dream in my heart. A few kind strangers asked me absent-minded questions. One even bought a copy out of pity, but none of that could soften the sting. I sat there, smiling politely, but inside I was crumbling. I could hear echoes of my past lunches packed, bills paid, favors given, moments when I had been the reliable one, the dependable backbone. And now, in the most important moment of my life, I was invisible. My presence meant less than a shopping trip, less than someone else's convenience. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. This wasn't simply about a book signing. This was about years of being overlooked, dismissed, and taken for granted. And as I gathered the unsold books into their boxes, I realized the betrayal at that table was only the final chapter of a much longer story, one I was finally ready to tell. I wasn't always the woman sitting alone at that empty table. For most of my life, I was the reliable one, the person who kept everything stitched together while everyone else pursued their own comfort. When my husband walked out, leaving me with 2 children who were still too young to understand why their father had vanished, I didn't crumble. I went back to work full-time and took on tutoring sessions in the evenings. I learned to stretch every dollar, to keep the lights on, to make sure my kids never felt the weight of my exhaustion. I carried heavy grocery bags home after long days, sometimes late at night, with papers still waiting to be graded on the kitchen table. I fell asleep over essays, only to wake up before dawn to pack lunches and get my kids to school. My life was a series of sacrifices, my own dreams folded neatly into the corners of everyone else's needs. Weddings, I helped pay for them. Down payments on houses, I scraped together what I could to make it possible. Emergencies, I was the first call, the dependable safety net. There are pictures that tell the story better than words. Family photos where I stand at the edge of the frame, holding a plate of food or balancing a child on my hip. Pictures of birthdays where I'm behind the cake, clapping while others blow out the candles. At graduations, I'm the proud parent clapping from the crowd, not the one anyone points to with pride. Always present, but rarely seen. Always holding everyone else up, but never being held up myself. It's strange how invisibility doesn't happen all at once. It seeps in slowly, year by year, until you start to believe that maybe this is just your role in life, to support, to sacrifice, to stay quiet while others shine. For years, I told myself it was enough, that watching my children succeed was reward enough for all I gave up. But somewhere deep down, a question lingered: at what point do sacrifices stop being love and start being taken for granted? I tried to ignore that question, but then one day, an event came along that stripped away any illusions I had left. That was the moment I realized my invisibility wasn't imagined. It was real, and it was complete. The day that broke me wasn't supposed to be dramatic at all. It was supposed to be a celebration. I had circled the date on my calendar, counting down the days with a mixture of nerves and pride. My first book launched my chance to finally step out of the shadows and hold something in my hands that was entirely mine. I told my children about it months in advance, reminded them gently in the weeks leading up, even texted them the address of the little bookstore downtown. I thought surely this time they would show up for me. That morning, I dressed with care, smoothing my suit jacket again and again, rehearsing in my mind the words I would say if asked to speak. I set up my display table, carefully arranging stacks of my novel so they looked like a small tower of possibility. The owner of the shop offered me encouragement, and I clung to it, still believing my family would come rushing in any moment. But as the clock moved past 2, then 3, I knew they weren't coming. The excuses trickled in later. Of course, a spa day, another commitment, the vague promise that they would catch the next one, as if a first book launch were something that came around every season. To them, it was just another errand on a crowded weekend. To me, it was my dream given life. The gap between what it meant to me and what it meant to them was so wide it hurt to even think about. As I sat in that chair, staring at rows of empty seats and unsold books, I felt a quiet anger bubbling under my sadness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an oversight. This was the truth I had been trying not to see for years to my family. I was dependable but disposable, always available, never celebrated. That was the night I understood something had to change. If I kept living this way, I would spend the rest of my life as a ghost in my own story. And I was finally done being invisible. That night, after packing up the boxes of unsold books and driving home in silence, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my kitchen table. The house felt too quiet, like it was listening. For years I had brushed off the sting of being overlooked, convincing myself that sacrifice was simply the role of a mother. But the empty chairs at my launch had pierced through every excuse I'd ever made. I knew I couldn't go on pretending anymore. I pulled out a yellow legal pad, the kind I had used for years to grade essays, and began to write. At the top, I scrawled one word, reckoning. Then I listed everything I had given over the years: college tuition, wedding contributions, house down payments, emergency loans that were never repaid, weekends of free babysitting, even the quiet, uncounted hours cooking meals, answering late-night calls, holding everything together. As the numbers added up, so did the weight of the truth I had poured decades of time, money, and love into my family. But when it was my turn to be seen, I was invisible. For the first time, I looked at those sacrifices not as proof of my love, but as a ledger of my invisibility. It was strange writing it down didn't make me feel smaller. It made me feel stronger. The pen moved steadily in my hand, and with each line, I felt something shift inside me. It was as if I was reclaiming my own life, naming the cost of everything I had given, and finally acknowledging that the price had been me. By the time I set the pen down, I no longer felt like a victim sitting in the shadows of other people's choices. I felt like a woman standing at the beginning of something new. My humiliation at the bookstore wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of my awakening. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in a drawer. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't chase after apologies that would never come. Instead, I felt a quiet certainty rising in me. This was the day I stopped being invisible. And tomorrow, I would begin preparing for what came next. Once I admitted the truth to myself, I felt a kind of calm I hadn't known in years. The silence of my house no longer pressed down on me, it steadied me, like the stillness before a storm. I sat again at that same table, my ledger of sacrifices in front of me, and for the first time, I saw not just what I had given away, but what I still had. Over the years, I had been careful. While everyone else assumed I lived only on a teacher's pension, I had quietly saved, invested, and made decisions that added up to something solid. The house was paid off. My retirement account was healthy. There were life insurance funds I had never spoken of, tucked away because I knew that announcing them would be like ringing a dinner bell for those who only saw me as a resource. I wasn't rich by anyone's measure, but I was far from powerless. I pulled out folders that had been collecting dust in the bottom drawer of my desk account statements. Old contracts, legal documents. I stacked them in neat piles, labeling each with the precision of the teacher I had once been. My eyes lingered on the name of my lawyer, someone who had gently nudged me for years to update my will. I realized it was time. By the next morning, I was on the phone, scheduling appointments, 9 o'clock with my lawyer, 11 with the bank's trust department, 2 in the afternoon with my financial advisor. Each call felt like another brick placed in a foundation that would hold me up, even if no one else ever did. I moved slowly, deliberately, almost ritualistically printing papers, making lists, checking dates. Every step carried with it a quiet satisfaction, a reminder that I had more power than my family ever realized. For decades, I had been their safety net. But what they didn't know was that I had been weaving my own net too. And as I closed the final folder and placed it on top of the stack, I felt something stir inside me, a steady anticipation. The storm was coming, though they didn't see it yet. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing myself to weather it. I was preparing to unleash it. The first time I finally spoke up, the room felt different before a word even left my mouth. We were gathered in my living room, my children, their spouses, even my grandchildren trailing in with curious eyes. They expected the same woman they had always known, agreeable, helpful, ready to smooth things over. But I wasn't her anymore. I sat with my back straight, my papers neatly stacked beside me, and I told them what I had carried silently for decades. I told them I would no longer be the invisible one who bailed them out, babysat at the drop of a hat, or rearranged her life to fit theirs. I explained that I had been more than generous, that I had given, and yet I was treated as if my presence was optional. The reactions came quickly, first disbelief, then anger. They told me I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic, that I was imagining things. Some tried to laugh it off, as if minimizing my pain would make it vanish. Others grew defensive, accusing me of being ungrateful for the family I had. Their voices rose, sharp and panicked, while I sat still, refusing to flinch. Inside, I felt a strange mix of fury and peace. Fury that it had taken me this long to claim my worth. Peace that, at last, I was saying the words out loud. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't begging. My calmness seemed to unnerve them more than any anger could. They demanded explanations, wanting to know what I meant when I said things were about to change. I let them stew in their discomfort. I only told them this, that I had drawn my line, and they would learn soon enough that the balance of power in this family was not what they thought it was. Their eyes darted to one another, searching for reassurance, but none of them could find it. And as the silence stretched, I realized they had no idea what was coming next. Because this was only the beginning. The real shock, the twist that would shatter every assumption they had, was still waiting just beyond the horizon. For a moment, after I set my boundaries, I thought that would be enough. I thought simply reclaiming my voice would shift the ground beneath us. But then life, in its strange and merciless way, handed me a truth I hadn't planned for. It started with a phone call, one I almost ignored. My sister had been listed as my emergency contact, and the clinic had reached out to her after I missed an appointment. She called me, her voice tight, and that's when I knew I couldn't hide it anymore. For months, I had been carrying a secret, a diagnosis I hadn't shared. Stage 3 cancer. Quietly, I had been weighing treatment options, going to appointments alone, making choices about how I wanted to spend the time I had left. When I told my children, the air in the room changed. Their anger drained away, replaced with disbelief, then panic. Suddenly, they were wide-eyed, leaning forward, asking questions they had never thought to ask before. Questions about my health, my feelings, my future. For years, they had dismissed me as overdramatic or invisible. Now, the truth hit them like a tidal wave. But the revelation didn't stop there. I explained how, knowing my time was uncertain, I had already taken steps they never imagined. I had rewritten my will. I had created trusts that would only be accessible if they chose to truly know me, not just use me. The financial security they had always assumed was theirs had been redirected, guarded by conditions they had never considered. I watched their faces shift as the pieces fell into place. The disbelief, the shock, the realization that their safety net was no longer guaranteed. For the first time, they saw me not as the background character of their lives, but as someone with power, with secrets, with choices of her own. The room fell into a heavy silence. My children stared at me, mouths half open, trying to reconcile the mother they thought they knew with the woman now sitting before them. I could feel it, the air had shifted, the balance had tipped. Everything they assumed about me, about our family, about their future, had just been rewritten. And that was only the beginning of the fallout. The moment the truth left my lips, the room erupted. The same children who once brushed me aside now tripped over themselves, pleading, arguing, spinning in circles of panic. They asked how I could have kept this from them, why I hadn't trusted them, what this meant for their futures. The same voices that once dismissed my book launch as just an event were suddenly frantic about wills, trusts, and inheritances. I sat still, almost detached, watching the chaos unfold. Their words tangled in the air, sharp with desperation, but I felt strangely serene. For the first time in years, I wasn't scrambling to soothe, to reassure, to make excuses. I was the calm at the center of their storm, and I let their panic wash over me without moving an inch. It struck me how ironic it all was. I had spent decades breaking myself to give them stability, double shifts to pay for tuition, quiet sacrifices for down payments, endless hours caring for their children. Back then, my exhaustion was invisible. My efforts were expected, not appreciated. Yet now, faced with the possibility of losing access to the very support they took for granted, suddenly they noticed me. Suddenly, I mattered. I couldn't help but think of all the moments I'd been cropped out of family photos. All the birthdays where my presence was a formality, but not a priority. How strange that the same people who had overlooked me so easily now couldn't bear the thought of being left out of my plans. There was a bitter satisfaction in that realization. Not vengeance, exactly, but justice. They were experiencing in one shocking moment the absence I had felt for years. And while they scrambled to grasp control, I sat in quiet power, knowing that the balance had finally shifted. Their questions kept coming, their fear spilling into anger. But I answered none of it. Not yet. Because while they thought they had heard everything, while they believed the ground had already crumbled beneath them, they didn't realize one simple truth. I wasn't done. I still had one final revelation to share, one last card that would change everything again. The silence in the room after their panic almost felt heavy enough to touch. They thought they had already heard the worst, that my revelation about the trusts and the diagnosis had been the end of my secrets. But I knew this was the moment to lay down my final truth. I told them that I had already made my peace. My will was rewritten. The assets they had always assumed would be theirs were no longer waiting like a safety net beneath them. Instead, I had chosen to redirect the bulk of what I had built toward places and people that truly honored my existence, my grandchildren, who still had time to learn what connection really meant. My sister, who had stood by me without condition, and community programs that would live on long after me. I explained that this wasn't punishment, but protection. I wasn't doing it out of spite, but because I had finally understood something love without respect isn't love at all, and inheritance without gratitude is poison. If my children wanted to rebuild a relationship with me, it would have to be because they wanted me, not what I could leave behind. Their faces crumpled with disbelief, anger, grief, but for once, I didn't carry the weight of it. For the first time in decades, I felt lighter. I wasn't defined by their reactions anymore. I was defined by the quiet certainty in my own heart. And as I looked around the room, I realized I had closed a circle that had been open for far too long. I had spent years invisible, my worth measured in favors and sacrifices. But in that moment, with the balance of power finally restored, I felt seen by the one person who mattered most, myself. It was cathartic, almost like exhaling after holding my breath for a lifetime. I wasn't afraid anymore of being alone, of being unloved, of leaving behind disappointment. I had rewritten not just my will, but my story. And as I closed my folder and pushed it away, I knew this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Because what I had learned wasn't just about family. It was about life itself. Looking back, I realized the lesson was never about money or inheritance. It was about love, and how love without respect is empty. For years, I believed that sacrificing myself would eventually earn me the place I longed for in my family's hearts. But the truth is, simple respect cannot be begged or bought. It has to be freely given, through presence, consistency, and care. The moment I stopped waiting for validation, I found something much greater dignity. By valuing myself first, I finally taught others how I deserved to be treated. And that's the lesson I want to leave with you. Ask yourself, are you showing up for the people who matter in your life, or only when it's convenient? Are you treating them as individuals with dreams and worth, or as background figures in your own story? Life is too short to stay invisible. Don't wait until it's too late to recognize the people who quietly give you everything. And if you are that person, remember you have the right to step forward, to be seen, and to demand the love and respect you deserve. If this story spoke to you, I'd love for you to like, share, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your voice matters here.